we begin the Storytelling Festival, we're going to get a welcome from a woman who has a great story all of her own. She's a member of the Puyallup tribe, and she's assistant professor of American Indian Studies at University of Washington, Tacoma. Let's welcome Dr. Danica Miller.
Siab Hashachel. Dr. Danica Miller, Sitsta, Spjallet Beshche. Sitsta T Tvad Siab Bilsterid Spjallet Besh. Titsta T Janisterud. Tista T Tusapa Carl William Sterud Hidashta. Sitsta I Tudkaya Marjorie Matheson Sterud Spjallet Besh. Futhal Fith Young Siaya. That is a traditional introduction for Coast Salish people generally, but Puyallup people more specifically, which is where we introduce ourselves according to our relations. And it's not so much a sort of a power move. It would be more so that the people you're introducing yourselves to understood where you came in sort of the tangled web of Coast Salish relations. You don't have to go very far back before you realize that we're all cousins. And that's true to a large extent today. So as I'm sure some of you are aware, Coast Salish peoples, Puyallup, Squally, all the way up, we're clan people, right? We lived in smaller bands of peoples, shared a lot of and we consider ourselves clans based on our water rights, our fishing rights, our ceremonies and songs. However, during the winter times, the clans would come together and move into the big longhouses. And some of those longhouses were huge. We know some of it was housed up to 1,000 people. And one of the things, sort of move back and forth in time, I've noticed lately on social media is people keep saying stuff like, oh, you're in my tribe because we agree on these things, or that person's in my tribe because we agree on these things. And while I have about a million reasons why I could rant against that, I'll rant only about one right now, which is that they mean when they say that a type of like-minded people, right? We have these things in common. And I think that really goes against to what a tribe used to mean, and really to a larger extent what tribe means today, or should mean, which is that it was a community of people who actually weren't like-minded, who had a lot of different ideas, a lot of different opinions, did not always get along, right? But despite all of that, they chose to build their community together, right? And why? What kept those people together? And I think about those cold nights in the longhouse, and they were all sitting around the fires together, and they'd have festivals and ceremonies, and they're telling stories. And it was that storytelling. It was that created that empathy for each other. It created that grace for each other, the grace for themselves. And it helped them understand themselves and why they were part of those communities, right? And I think today, when we have so much division and so much pointing of fingers instead of hand-holding, it's because in a lot of ways we've lost the stories. And it's so great to look out here and to understand that we're all here to listen, to learn, and to build our communities and ourselves and each other. So thank you for being here today. Welcome to the Puyallup territory. I'm so happy to be invited to listen and to learn and hear your stories. We don't have anything if we don't have the stories. Shabitsit Hishkoyu.
Thank you, Danica. That's a beautiful welcome. Before we get into the stories today, we want to take just a few moments to remember Don Lucien. So, a lot of what, if you love Tacoma, a lot of what you know as Tacoma has been touched by the incredible energy and vision of Dawn Lucien. She helped establish the University of Washington, Tacoma. She led successful efforts to resolve a land dispute between the Puyallup tribe, Indians, and private developers. She's a big reason why we're sitting in such a modern space right now today in the Broadway Center for the Performing Arts. And if you drive down the 11th Street hill and you're able to keep going all the way across the Murray Morgan Bridge, it's because Dawn did a tremendous amount to help save that bridge. Dawn thought Tacoma was the gem of the universe. Has anybody heard her say that? Yes. And about the only achievements she wasn't able to put on her list were making sure that Mount Rainier was returned to the name Mount Tacoma, and that Tacoma, she was hoping, would soon be established as the conflict resolution center of the world. But when those things finally come to pass, we can all share stories that we know Dawn was there and helped make it happen. Yes. Dawn served as a member and advisor for WILLO, and many of the WILLO members turned to Dawn for guidance and friendship, and it means something very special for us to be able to bring Dawn's memory and Dawn's spirit and energy here with us today at this event. She's been here many times. And for us to take a few moments to remember Dawn and reflect on her, joining us is Kurt Olson, Dawn's younger son. Kurt, would you come on up?
That I think my mother is on top of Mount Tacoma right now, taking care of the next line of project she's got in mind. My name is Kurt Olson, and I would like to thank all of you for being here today, to honor my mother, Dawn Lucien, and support WILLO. Mom, as most of you know, is a huge fan of WILLO and its founder, Song Shen. It is also an honor for me to share some recollections of my mother, Dawn Lucien. It is an understatement to say that Mom was involved in many things that were always inclusive. But she always made time for her three sons. I am the youngest, and she was an active participant in the PTA, a den mother, and my fiercest baseball fan during my Little League career. I want to share a story about how she helped me overcome my shyness. She thought it would be a good idea for me to become involved with the Tacoma Little Theater. I thought it was a great idea also because I had a friend who was already involved. Mom signed me up, and I auditioned for the part of Dopey in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And I got the part. We practiced and practiced, and then opening day came. We got into the old Merc, and we were on our way down to the theater. It was a short distance, but I could feel the anxiety building up, and by the time we arrived, I was sweating and nervous and scared. This was my first play, of course, and starting to feel sick. She pulled up in front of North 2nd, and I started to cry. I didn't understand what was happening to me. I was frozen. I knew I couldn't go inside the theater, period. I knew she calmly put the car in park and turned to me and said, "I love you, Kurt. What you are about to overcome now will be of great significance for the rest of your life. You are going to walk through those theater doors. You will then look at the stage as you're walking toward it and imagine yourself acting your part along with your fellow actors, while realizing you're having a magnificent time. You will continue to realize that the play has ended and the crowd is cheering wildly for you and your fellow actors. You will feel joyous and know you were successful and know that you have grown." I got out of the car and opened the theater doors, and the rest played out just as she said it would. I realize now that the mental framing she walked me through was how she approached her interests and projects. She envisioned them from beginning to end. More importantly, she was a great listener and generous with her time. Just a quick story about her and buying an old beat-up restaurant in Mexico. We had the idea, my stepfather had some ailments and we were going to go to Mexico and get him treated, but we realized he was going to be there quite a long time. But while we were there down there in Barra de Navidad, which is just south of Puerto Vallarta, my mother and I fell in love with Mexico. I had never been there before. So, unbeknownst to me, she took an interest and she bought an old restaurant down there. And then she asked my wife Ricky and my brother Eric to join us down there and check it out. Well, she was 85 years old when she did this. And we had a neighbor down there, her name was Bonnie. And Bonnie sang in a couple of the nightclubs down there. And being our neighbor, my mother and her got to know one another. Well, my mother knew thousands of ragtime, old-time songs. And Bonnie knew that because my mother would sing them while she was in the kitchen of our little beat-up house that, of course, we were fixing up in Mexico. So Bonnie asked her to join her, and this is one of the biggest clubs down there, on stage. My mother gladly agreed. Well, she's there with a gal probably less than half her age who's belting out these tunes, and my mother didn't miss a lick. And then she got into singing these older songs, and the Mexican folks went wild. The natives loved it. Bonnie loved it. We loved it. And I just want to let you know that no matter what, she always felt that you were never too old to try something new. Thank you. I would like to conclude with a few of Mom's axioms. It's all in your head. Always be positive. It's easier. Don't ever look back. Marry a woman with less problems than you. And I did. Look for the nickel under the foot. Tacoma is the center of the universe. And remember, Mount Tacoma, not that other name. And most importantly, don't ever give up, ever. Well, that's all I've got for today. I just want to thank WILLO for honoring my mother today and for having and letting me sit here and share some memories of my mother. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you for giving us a chance to bring Dawn back into this space again, and I know she'll be here with us throughout this event. As we started, as you came in the lobby, how many people got the Instagram question? What is your favorite age? What was your favorite age and why? How many people answered that? A few of you? So there was this question going, what is your favorite age and why? I want to give you just 1 second and see, can you identify what was the favorite age? Raise your hand when you think you've got the number, what your favorite age was. Okay. I'm going to count to 3 and then I want you to yell it out. 1, 2, 3. Okay, those are all different ages. Yeah, that's making me think that maybe there's not one age that's a perfect age. So I will tell you, I do have an age that was not my perfect age, and that was teenage. When I was 14, I had a lot of angst about just being myself, being who I was, and my mom had a lot of sympathy for me. So I grew up in North Carolina. My mom had multiple sclerosis, and by the time she was 40, she couldn't walk anymore. And that's important because she's sitting in her wheelchair talking to me, dealing with a chronic illness, but I'm 14 and my problems are much more important than anything else. And she still managed to give me sympathy, and she said, you know, Megan, people always say to me, they say, wouldn't you love to be younger again? And I say, absolutely not. I might like to have that old body again, but I wouldn't give up any of these lessons I've learned through my life. I worked too hard for them. And at the time I thought, that's ridiculous. But the years have passed, and I get it now. I don't want to go back if I have to give up anything I've learned. And so today, what we're going to get the benefit of is all of our storytellers coming and sharing their wisdom of the ages. And so whether you are very, very young and you're kind of getting a view of what will come forward, or if you've been through a lot of experiences, you're going to be able to expand out to the side, and it's as though you're getting more lifetimes right here. So, I mean, you didn't think, but you're going to make a life profit while you're here today. This was a good investment decision. So please join me in welcoming our storytellers for today. They're coming up from just down here. Let's welcome Miriam Barnett, Diane Clarkson, Alfie Alvarado-Ramos, Marilyn Strickland, and Monroe. Thank you guys. We're all cozy up here now. It's just like a great big living room. So our first featured storyteller is Miriam Barnett. And Miriam, you are Chief Executive of Opportunity for the YWCA Pierce County. You've received numerous social justice awards. You serve on many boards for local, county, and state groups. You also teach at the University of Washington, Tacoma for their fundraising management program. And yet, from your biography, I am to believe that you somehow still have spare time during which you garden, make jewelry, knit, weed, create collages, and cook. And I think it's only because you're so young that you have that much energy. So, Miriam, your story that you're going to share with us today is going to take us back 12 years to when you first started working at the YWCA. What was it like?
So thank you, Megan. I started working at the YWCA on July 5th, 2005. And I was immediately impressed with all the comprehensive services that they offered for domestic violence victims and their families. But at the same time, I was equally appalled by the condition of the domestic violence shelter. The shelter had been designed in 1927 as a place for single traveling women to be safe at night. The YW would actually send a matron down to the train station to look for single traveling women moving west for work and offer them a free night stay at the YWCA. The 97 square foot rooms worked perfectly for that usage, with a shared kitchen and a shared bathroom on each of the 2 floors. But in 1976, we converted that space to the first domestic violence shelter in the state of Washington. The executive director at the time had death threats, and the police would show up at our door with an abuser and demand that we give his wife back. I certainly am grateful our relationship with the police has changed 100% since then. So those 97 square foot rooms that worked great for a single woman now were meant for a family, a mom and maybe 2 or 3 kids. And those single beds were replaced with a bunk bed. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm claustrophobic, and a bunk bed just isn't going to work for me, much less sharing a twin mattress with one of my children. And if I didn't want to spend the night there, why would I expect women and families in crisis to want to spend up to 90 days there? That's just not how I was raised. So one day the building started telling me it agreed with me because the pipes started breaking. It was too old of a building to accommodate families like that 24/7. So one day at about 2 in the morning, a pipe broke in the top floor bathroom of the shelter. And because no one was in the bathroom at the time, no one realized the pipe had broken. And by the time it was noticed, the water had gone down all 5 floors of the YWCA. And the floor immediately under the shelter, which was our big meeting room, was under about 2 feet of water. I got a phone call, and I went down, and I met our shelter manager. And she said to me when she saw the devastation, she said, "Miriam, would you just get this shelter out of this building?" And I said, "Yes, I will." And then I totally panicked because I had no idea how I was going to do it. I had never run a capital campaign before. But as luck would have it, as we approached about spring of 2007 and we were entering a recession, the apartment building across the street became available. So I looked at it, and it was perfect. It had 4 size units from small efficiencies to big 2 bedrooms. It would accommodate our families so well. So I went to the board, and I told them about it, and I asked if we could apply for a $1 million grant from the state so we could buy the building and start a $5 million capital campaign. And they agreed. So we applied. And then we waited, and we waited, and then we got word that we didn't get the grant. My board lost their courage, and I would go home every night, so discouraged, and I would vent to my husband. And after a while, even he said, "Do you really need to do this project?" The general consensus was the shelter was good enough. And if we could just wait for the recession to pass, perhaps we could just regroup then and decide what to do. But I couldn't wait. Both my parents really cared about the rights of others, so it was in my DNA. My dad was active in the civil rights movement, fighting for equal rights for African Americans back in the 60s. If he was alive today, he would proudly wear a Black Lives Matter t-shirt. I always thought he would be murdered because back then in the 60s, that's what happened to people who cared about the civil rights and worked for equality. People like Medgar Evers and Martin Luther King, and locally in Seattle, James Pratt, who was a friend of my father's. The Pratt Fine Arts Center is named after him. My parents would discuss these murders in our family home, and they left quite an impression on me. My dad did die when I was 18, but luckily he wasn't murdered. He died of a one and only heart attack. My mom was all about the Cesar Chavez United Farm Workers Union. Boycotting was her hobby. The list of things we couldn't eat, like grapes and head lettuce, and the places we couldn't shop, like Safeway, was long and lasted my entire childhood. When she was 70, she threw a party for herself, but she made it clear that no one was allowed to bring wine made from California grapes. And this was decades after the boycott had ended. It never ended for her. When I was growing up, we never went to the zoo or went out to eat or went on vacations. My mom had had 2 brain tumors, one before I was born and one after I was born, and so money was tight because the medical bills were high. So both my parents worked. My mom was an inner-city high school teacher in Seattle, and my dad was the executive director of a nonprofit social service agency with an office in Seattle and one in Portland. We would sometimes go with him to Portland, and we'd always stop in Tacoma at the Brown and Haley Seconds Factory. Mr. Haley was on my dad's board, and we would get to choose a misshapen mountain bar, which was a big deal because we were never allowed to have candy. So Tacoma has had a special place in my heart for many years. My dad loved his job, and my mom hated hers. So it was no surprise I became a CEO of a nonprofit organization. Because both of my parents worked and often had these causes they care about, they were rarely home. So I was a latchkey kid from the time I was in first grade until my entire childhood. I don't remember what my brother, who was 18 months older than me, did after school, but I would often forget my key, and so I would just wait in the garage for someone to come home. Back in that day, we didn't have to lock our garages, and I was too embarrassed to go to a neighbor's house and tell him I'd forgotten my key yet again. My mom didn't cook, so we were raised on TV dinners. My favorite was the Swanson macaroni and cheese that came in the round tin, and my brother, he loved those Hungry Man dinners, with the dessert on top. I became a vegetarian when I was 15. It was my way of taking my power back on my food choices. My mom would write me a blank check that she would sign, and I would walk to the grocery store and I'd buy the ingredients I needed to cook and to bake, 2 things I still love to do today. So a story I like to tell about my mom is that when my brother and I were in our early 20s, she invited us and our significant others over for Thanksgiving dinner. Now, you remember the part that she didn't cook, right? Okay, that's good. So I brought a vegetarian lasagna because at the time, my partner, who shortly thereafter became my husband, and I were vegetarian. And we got to my childhood home, and the table was set for us to sit down and have Thanksgiving dinner. Now, what you need to know is this was a miracle, because when I was growing up, we never had family dinners around that table. My mom was a hoarder, and the table was used for piling whatever she was hoarding. There was never a place at the table for a plate, and we never did sit together as a family. So, but for this day, the table was set, and we sat down, and the first thing she brought out was this big bowl of canned, overcooked peas, complete with the liquid from the can. It was like a treasure hunt finding those peas. And then she brought out the turkey so proudly on a platter, and it was completely pink. My brother gasped and said, "How long did you cook that bird?" And my mom said, well, for 30 minutes, just like the directions said. She missed the part that it was 30 minutes a pound. Needless to say, we all ate lasagna for dinner that night and swore we'd never go to her house again for a meal. My mom was just a great social justice advocate. She walked so many picket lines, and she did it with great gusto. I'm just not sure she was meant to be a mom. Her favorite story about me was that on my first day of kindergarten, she got a phone call from the school, and they told her she needed to come and bring a pair of underwear because while I had on a dress, I'd evidently forgotten to put on my underwear. She told this story a lot over and over again as if it was my fault, which, I believed it was. Until I was in my 50s, and she was telling me the story yet again, and I had this epiphany moment of, I think probably most moms help dress their kids on their first day of kindergarten, and I was able to give up the guilt. Yeah. So my story about my mom's inability to cook and her story about me not wearing my underwear, I think really makes my work more meaningful at the YWCA. You see, at the YWCA, and it's why I absolutely had to have a new shelter, and I couldn't give up that vision, because I wanted our families to have a dining room table. I wanted them because I see that as a symbol of communication and unification and celebration, and that's what I had with my children. And just like me, most of our clients had never had that, and so I really was determined to make that possible. And as luck would have it, we found another pot of money that became available at the state level. And we applied, and then we waited, and we waited, and we found out that we were being granted $1.3 million. We bought the building, and then we continued to raise $5 million. Do you remember the part about how we were in a deep recession? And as we were about finished with the renovations, we started working with a furniture company because, we needed to outfit all those apartments. And we made it clear that our budget was $60,000 and that we needed things like, we wanted tables that had curved corners because we didn't want our kids hitting their head on any sharp, square tables. Well, they came back a little while later with the bid, and it was much higher than $60,000. Another dark day. Well, a board member, hearing of my woes, called me up and said, "Would you be willing to meet with my interior designer?" And I thought two things in that moment, quietly and to myself. The first was, if we can't afford furniture from a store, how are we going to afford interior designers? And the second thought was, she's a board member and I can't say no. So I met with the designer, and she had always had a dream of her own, a vision of her own. She had read a magazine years ago about a group of designers who'd adopted a shelter in California and completely outfitted it and made it a beautiful space. And she had always wanted to do that. And here was the opportunity. So she got 31 other designers to agree pro bono to adopt our apartments. They furnished them, they provided rugs and art and towels and bedding, you name it, and made those apartments the most beautiful apartments you will ever see. In fact, when we had our public opening, person after person came up to me and said, "This is so much nicer than where I live. I wish I could rent an apartment here." And in that moment, I knew my vision had been met. So I believe that if you really want something and you focus on it and you believe in it and set that intention, it can happen. One of my bracelets says, "She believed she could, so she did." And I wear it every day. So I feel so blessed that the YWCA has allowed me to live my passion and my values, but it's really done more for me than that. It allowed me to fill this void that I had since childhood of wanting to see families unite around a dining room table. So my life has taught me 3 important lessons, and here they are. Number 1, remember to wear your underwear. Number 2, family meals and food creates memories, both good and bad. And number 3, sometimes good enough isn't. If you're given the opportunity to help people in need, give the very best you can for as long as you can in any way that you can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miriam. At first I thought maybe your mom had candied the turkey. Was it a candy treatment or something? No, so okay. It's got to be more than 30 minutes, everybody, just in case. Per pound. So our next storyteller is Diane Clarkson, Pierce County Prosecutor and the President of the Tacoma-Pierce County Bar Association. Deputy Prosecutor, I have that written down, and I just didn't read it. Thank you for correcting me. Diane Clarkson is the Pierce County Deputy Prosecutor and the President of the Tacoma-Pierce County Bar Association. Diane, your extracurricular activities are just about as busy as Miriam. I have here that you've served with art commissions, domestic violence commissions, hate crime task forces. You're a past board member with the Urban League, Northwest Leadership Foundation, Tacoma-Pierce County Bar Association, Pierce County Minority Bar Association, and you're currently a board member with Safe Streets. It's a lot. So that you were born in Washington, D.C., but you moved to a very segregated Birmingham, Alabama in 1968, and you were the first in your family to complete college and law school, but law is not Diane's first love. You've served in music ministry for churches in Birmingham, Kentucky, Washington, D.C., Tacoma, and Seattle. So you've got these two loves, music and law, and your story today is going to take us back to that moment in time when that first and second love collided. So tell us, how did that happen?
Thank you, Megan. That's a great picture. And I say that first before I get into my collision, is that the fellow in the back is my brother. He's passed away. Boy, already. My brother was so awesome. He was a math whiz. He was the chess champion in Birmingham, Alabama. He spoke fluent Latin, worked on memorizing the dictionary because he just loved to learn. We'd go on family trips and he'd take his botany books and his zoology books and we'd all be playing and he was studying. He was an incredible guy who got caught up. And I wish he had learned some of the lessons that I learned. I think he'd be here today. The other two characters on the side are some of my best cousins. Butchie, the skinny one with the hat, with the knees, the little knock knees, Butchie, Charles. They would hate I'm telling. And Michael, the one looked so mean, he thought he was a Casanova. You could not tell Michael he wasn't God's gift to women. So I love this picture because it just takes me back in my childhood, my collision of my two loves, music and law. I was at college, Berea College. Please look up Berea College. It's no tuition. It's a work-study college where you work in order to earn your room and board. And I wouldn't have been to college except for Berea. I was about to graduate from college, and Professor Michael Berheide sent for me. He was a political science teacher. I took no political science. My degrees were in music, my first love, English, kind of maybe a second love, and music and French. Music, literature, and French were my degrees. And I got a word that the political science professor wanted me to come to his office. And at that time, I was really struggling with life. I was kind of caught up between who am I and why do people like me, or do people like me? And just in that quandary, I had recently done a performance in Carmen Jones. I did music and theater, and I was playing Frankie, the second lead role. And I had, we were preparing for opening night, and I got a call from my high school sweetheart. I went running down the hall to answer the call. It was Billy, and so excited, it's opening night, call from high school sweetheart. And when I answered the phone, or went to the phone, he sounded a little concerned, and I was worried. And he says to me, on opening night, he says, Diane, I found someone else, and we're breaking up. That was not what I was expecting to hear. There was no congratulations. There was no break a leg, any of the things I was thinking. And it was opening night. I had hours before I had to prepare for this play. And I will tell you that opening night was the best night ever. I played Frankie. I beat out that rhythm on the drum. I had my little table dance. I was fabulous. And we went on, the show went for four nights, and it was a huge success, and I couldn't tell anybody, because how do you tell your, you know, ugh. But after the show was over, I started wrestling with, does anybody like me? Why do they like me? I knew I had music. At the time, I was interested. I was busy with theater. I played violin in the college orchestra. I played violin in the community orchestra. I was a part of the Black Student Union. I played church. I played for Middletown Baptist Church in the community there at Berea. I was a music TA. I had my job. Everything was going for me. But I was questioning, and I realized that that moment that I didn't deal with caught up with me. So when Professor Braheide called for me, I'm like, what does he want from me? I was kind of feeling like I was pouring out, and nobody was pouring in. What could this man want? I don't know him. He wants me to play the piano. He wants a violin for the Messiah. What? But I put him off for a while, and eventually he wasn't going to let me go. So I showed up, and Professor Braheide says, Diane, what are you planning to do when you graduate? Well, I was on my way to Europe for my last college study, and I thought I was going to be an English professor. I loved English literature, and I loved my English professors. Any professors out there, shout out to you all. But I was going to study literature. And he broke down, well, you could do literature, and you could be a professor, and this is how much you're going to make. And he broke, or you can go to law school and write your own ticket. I was intrigued. I had grown up pretty poor. You know, my family from D.C. to Birmingham, and my grandmother was from Chicago. My grandfather was from Birmingham, and so my grandmother had that mean, heavy-handed side, and my grandfather was the gentle one who took me to church to kind of soften some of it up. And we were poor. My mother made $12,000, and she always wanted to own her own home. But she was never able to move out of my grandparents' house with us until she was 70, when she owned her first home. So to me, home ownership is really important, because my mom wanted a home. She finally got a home. My home is in honor of my mom. So writing my own ticket, I'm like, well, let's talk about this. And so we prepared, and he got me ready for the LSAT, and he had me come to his office and study. And he invested in me. And I went on and took the LSAT. I went on to Europe and got word that I passed the LSAT. I was accepted in the law school I attended, and I'm like, now what am I going to do? All I knew was music. I literally had played the piano since I was 5 and started playing for churches and getting paid when I was 14. This law thing, I really didn't know. And there I was in law school, and they're teaching me about criminal law, particularly. And the teacher asked the question, if someone assaults you, hits you, no, he didn't say assault, he said, if someone strikes you on the metro, he asked, what crime has been committed, and what do you do? And my answer was, you hit them back. And that's exactly what the class did. They all laughed. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong with that answer, because I grew up in a household where we had to fight. My grandmother made us fight, and her thing, I believe now, is that she wanted us to be able to take care of ourselves. We were in a segregated South, and we weren't always wanted. And she wanted to make sure, again, she didn't say these words. It's years later that I figured that she just wanted us to make sure we could take care of ourselves. So I fought. I fought because kids teased me because my nose was flat. That was a beat down. I fought because people teased me because I had a gap in my teeth. That was a fight. If you disrespected me, it was a fight, because I had to stand up for myself. And then my grandmother's uncle would come home at Christmas time and check us to see how many fights that you've been in. That was the culture that I grew up in. And now I'm in law school, and they're telling me it's a crime. I could have had a record. But nobody was calling the police then. So eventually, when I came and became a criminal prosecutor, you can believe that I took the lessons that I learned and grew up with, and I had compassion, one, for the victim, because again, while I was always fighting, I didn't start a fight. And that was a rule in the house. We couldn't start a fight, but we couldn't back down from a fight. And so I knew what it was like to be a victim, to be picked on, to be teased, to be less than. And that picture, those little shoes I had on, That was a fight because they weren't good enough for some people. My grandmother made my dresses. That was a fight because I didn't wear store-bought dresses. So when I started prosecuting, I started looking at the assaults I was coming across my desk. What's feeding this stuff? What's the anger? Why the anger? Who are the victims? And you start talking with people and hearing their stories and recognizing what restorative justice is. Because every bully I fought, after the fight, we became best of friends. Every single one. And so I took that with me as I'm prosecuting. What are the real issues here? What can we do to make it right? And not only for the victim, but also for the perpetrator. Because if we don't fix that issue, there are going to be more victims. There are going to be more issues. There are going to be more problems. And so I reached all the way back in my past and collided, bringing people together. Because with my music, all it was bringing people together, harmonies, listening to the tones. Where's the alto part? Where's the soprano part? Where's the melody? Where's the bass and the baritone? And bringing and connecting those things. And it took me a minute to see the connection between music and law. But the way I would study a song or the way I'd study a concert piece was the way I'd study a case and helping bring resolution. And so, of course, when I found out that my office had authored an amendment that would remove the Minority Bar Association from an ad hoc committee that would help select a judge, of course I took off from my work and I went to the council meeting and I spoke up. And I spoke up on behalf of the Minority Bar because, of course, I had been a founder of the Minority Bar, one of the founding members. The voices of those who are crying out marginalized was important and incredible to me to be a part of. And then I realized the backlash of speaking out. And I realized the trouble that you get in when you speak up for those who won't speak or those who can't speak, those who don't have a voice. And then I remembered my grandfather who worked in a segregated steel mill in Alabama, and all the times he couldn't speak up. But he sat there lovingly and kindly and patiently, making sure I learned the softness, the other side of fighting and taking on the bully. Make sure I learned kindness. Make sure I understood as I played piano for the churches the message and the music that I was playing and teaching. To understand that there's a better way of dealing with conflict. That understanding people and communicating is key. Sometimes we agree to disagree, and that's okay too. And then recognizing that it doesn't matter what it is that my nose is flat or there's a gap in my teeth. I'm like, Mom, can you just take me to the dentist? And we didn't realize, again, it was a matter of money at the time. But realizing that I wouldn't tease you because of any shortcomings you have, because I don't want to be teased. And processing those things, those lessons, and recognizing at the end of the day, kindness really matters. Taking your time to encourage and feed and speak words of life to the downtrodden, to those that look hopeless or seem hopeless, because you never know where you're planting that seed. You never know where that one person is. Like Professor Berheidi, I didn't know him and didn't realize who he was until 15 years after I had graduated from college and I was well in my career, and I went back to a homecoming, and they called Michael Berheidi as the announcer for a basketball game. I'm like, that's the man who pulled me aside and said, Diane, you can do better. Diane, you can do different. And I shifted everything I loved, my first love, to learning, unlearning some things so that I can be a good attorney, understanding their laws and their rules and their regulations and that they benefit the community, and being a part of that change, that dynamic bringing of peace and community in the right way, in a way that helps and heals. I still do my music. It is a second nature because, again, I have fallen in love with law and the people that I've met in my practice. and they've been kind. The attorneys, just when I was about to give up, they elected me president of the Bar Association to let me know that my work isn't done yet. And I recognize that my brother, who ought to be here, who was such a better person than me, he wouldn't have hurt a flea. He didn't fight. He wouldn't fight. This man here, and I recognize that he's gone and I'm not, there's a reason. And it's to live out who my granddaddy was and balance who my grandmother was and make sure the experiences that I endured, I don't endure or put on anyone else, and help those who are still bullying and committing crimes. Again, see, there's accountability and there's restoration. If we can get those two things, I believe we have a better Pierce County, a better world. I certainly love to talk with Donald Trump.
So much, Diane. So, and Diane, you had us there also that idea of kind of that beginning of the career, and I recognize for probably a lot of people that getting started, moving from college and getting to where you're going to be doing your job is rocky. And for those of us who've been through that, we might have expected, okay, here at the beginning, sure, I've got a lot to learn, it's going to be very different. But after a few decades, you get the feeling like things should be a little smooth, like your brain gets full and you get to know the drill, and that feels good as you start to get older and deeper in your career that you know what's going on. But our next storyteller, who knows absolutely what she's doing, had an interesting experience late in her career. Alfie Alvarado-Ramos. Alfie, you were born in Puerto Rico, and you went on to serve 22 years of active duty, and when you retired 24 years ago, you were Command Sergeant Major of Madigan Army Medical Center and Troop Command Joint Base Lewis McChord. Then you started a whole new career in the Washington State Department of Veterans Affairs. And so all of that experience made you completely and utterly qualified for your current position of Director of Washington State Department of Veterans Affairs. But you're going to take us back in your story to a time not so long ago when you had to make a surprisingly hard choice accepting that position. First, though, you also have a story about this photo from your childhood. What is it?
So that picture, the original picture is fuzzy. That's why the picture you're seeing is fuzzy there. I am on the left-hand side, my sister Yolanda in the center, and my brother Fred is there with us. What I really want to bring your attention is to the back of us. Our house was a wood house with tin roof, and when you see it in the back, it was up on cement props. When my father bought that house, it was very old, and I can tell you that as we were, and it was a two-bedroom house, very, very tiny. When we walked inside of that house and we ran, we had to run very softly, because if we run too hard, you know how kids run, our foot would go right through the wooden floor. That's how old it was. The walls, were kind of eaten by termites, and there were holes in them that we had to put newspaper to make sure that at night, the roaches and flying varmint would not come into the house. That's poor. And interestingly, all of us slept in the same bed. And my brother was a bedwetter. So that really kind of put us in a very close situation. And so this childhood picture that I had not looked for a little bit of time brought a lot of memories. Because when you look at us, we're very well dressed. And one of the things that our mother told us, especially when we had our clothes very well starched, iron, they smell good, they smell like the sun because they dried in the sunshine, was you can be poor, but you can't be a pig. That was something very, that stuck with me when it comes to, how our families dressed and, how we comported. Because, it was something that she taught us very early on, that just because you come from a certain upbringing and you are financially challenged, that you don't have to be like that, that you can rise above to be able to make sure that you can be the best. So that's kind of, what the picture brought to me, and it's something that, it just lives right here in my heart because, of those teachings. So what I'm going to be talking today is going to be about the issue of transition. Transition and how a seemingly simple, because it was not a great decision, a simple thing can actually get in the way of being able to reach your maximum potential. So it goes back to 2012, November, when the general election took place and we got a new governor. Governor Gregoire decided not to run, and Governor Inslee and I can't remember the other candidate's name right now, McKenna, run for election. Prior to that, earlier that year, the Director of Veterans Affairs, I was the Deputy Director, decided to retire. And it was not a secret with the veterans community that I really wanted to be able to get that position. And through the years, because I belong to a national organization, I would sit down with all our legislators in Washington, D.C., and to be able to talk about legislative issues, the State Department of Veterans Affairs, what veterans needed in the state of Washington, and met a number of times with then Representative Jay Inslee. So I got to know him on a professional basis and not a, not a personal basis. Also, during that time, in 2012, there was a significant move by the veterans community to be able to let the candidate know that they wanted Alfie Alvarado to be the next Director of Veterans Affairs. So it didn't come as a surprise when in November 16th of 2012, I got a call from the governor-elect who asked me if I would want to be part of his team as the Director of Veterans Affairs. And of course, I didn't say, well, let me think about it, Gov. I said yes. And I will tell you that the very first call that I made was to my wife, who probably is up there somewhere. And I called my mom to be able to let her know, and she was extremely proud. And then a day later, I called my team to be able to give them the good news. And I will tell you, when you have elections like that, it is a very tenuous time. Everybody's on pins and needles. Because if you're at will, your life can change. And the one thing when I sat down with my team, it was, I have some news for you. The governor has asked me to be the Director of Veterans Affairs. It was one of those moments when everybody held their breath. The one thing that Jay Inslee did for me was he allowed for me to choose my team. And at that point in time, we had a magnificent group of people who were working with me, and therefore, I wanted to retain them all. But I can tell you that in the political world, there are times when the chief executive comes, they will bring in people that they have worked with, or they work the campaign and they want a place for them, or they know about an agency that may have problems, and they want to be able to change things, and therefore they make significant personal changes that a director may not have control over. And I was fortunate enough to be able to keep the same team that I had. So we made the announcement, everybody was happy because the pins and needles were gone, and then it came time for me to think about this transition. So I had a very comfortable office that was kind of made for me. As you probably can tell, I'm kind of vertically challenged. And everything was kind of made for me, as far as the light colors in my furniture, a table that I had that had the chairs to be able to work with people, a wonderful whiteboard to be able to put all of my, my sketches and my doodling and all that. And while the director then had an office that was gray, had a couple of wing chairs, opulent, dark furniture. I also drove a hybrid car because I wanted to be able to have a small footprint and be able to make my contribution, while the director's car was a large, leather, all the powers, gas hog. So I was going, well, I think I'm pretty comfortable in my office right now. I think I'm going to stay there and just keep the things that I have and not move. The offices were right next to each other. And I went over next door to the director then, and I'll call him John because his name is John. And I said, John, I think I'm going to stay in my office because everything is just right and I feel pretty comfortable in there. And he just goes, well, that sounds pretty good. Your deputy can just start moving whenever he feels, like moving. And at that moment, kind of the hair just rose in the back of my head. And I felt this trepidation and this anxiety, something that I had never felt before. And I couldn't understand why. So that evening, as I drove home, I just kept asking the question, why? Why do I feel like that? And it just, I had an epiphany in which it came back to my upbringing. I'm going to tell you that my family, especially my father and my mother, were pillars of the community, people who would do all kinds of things for others without looking for a reward or personal gain. And that was something that was inculcated in all of us. When you do things, do them quietly. Don't splash. You don't need to get more than what you need. Be satisfied because otherwise it's just a waste. Be happy with what you've got. Be happy with good enough because then you can contribute to others and you be humble. And I think that was one of the things that affected me in such fashion because moving to the bigger office, and being uncomfortable because that was the fact, my furniture fitted me. This man was 6'3", and everything was, probably about 5 or 6 inches taller than what I was used to, was kind of a symbol. And we'll tell you a little bit more of my upbringing and try to kind of tie it together to make sure that I don't ramble too much. But my mom is 85 years old. To this day, she still visits people and feeds, the ill as part of the work that she does. She's 85 years old, and she goes visit the old people to be able to serve them. Most of those people are younger than she is. And she's one of those people that goes on stealth mode. Nobody knows what she's doing. She drives still, which scares us to death. And you can tell by all the scrapes on the side of the car every time she tries to get the car out of the, just out of the house. But she taught us, that, and even without telling us, just by her example, that when you give, and you give quietly, and you don't make a fuss about it, you're doing God's work. Okay. So for me, going back to this issue of the office thing, when I came back, when I went home, I just kind of went, there's just something in here that it doesn't feel right, and identified that particular issue. Had I not moved from my office into the corner office, where usually directors are, I probably would have stayed in an operational mode instead of strategic, because my mindset would have stayed right there, inside of what was comfortable for me, instead of being uncomfortable. And it would probably have confused our staff, because they wouldn't know where to go, because they always went to the director's office that way. And therefore, I made that decision. I said, you know what, I'm walking it back, I'm going to move. So I let the director, then I said, John, I just thought about it, I'm going to move to the office. And again, he just said, fine. Now, it's 2 moves, but that's just fine. I didn't want to buy new furniture because we were in a really bad situation then in the agency, so I just stayed, with the stuff that he had. But that taught me a lot of lessons. In in being able to look at being good enough, in being to have this humility that is sometimes taught to us, and especially how women are taught, that don't expect to get, more than what you've got, or be happy with what you have. It's just not good enough. We have to leap. We have to just go beyond what we think is comfortable and get into the discomfort, because it's about jumping into the pool instead of just dangling your feet and just kind of getting them wet. So the moral of the story is that John and I, on a Saturday, went to that office. I helped him pack, and he helped me paint the great office with a bright yellow that when people came back on that Monday, they complained that they needed sunglasses to be able to go into my office. So the things that I learned, that I try based on this lesson, and a lot of the things that I have learned in my life, and those that I mentor, there is several things. Number one, embrace discomfort, because that's very important. Number two, volunteer. Volunteer, because when I saw my mom's example, I volunteered to do things with nursing homes, with people that I loved, to be able to give quietly with nobody looking. And also, there's one lesson, and I just can't remember it right now, but it's about choosing excitement over fear. So my lesson was that all this issue about being comfortable, about having the familiarity of my office, about not moving, was about fear. And I couldn't identify it, I couldn't put my finger on it. And the fact was that I chose to be excited about the move and just leave behind that fear that I had, to be able to again be able to move, and from this operational side to then be able to be strategic, from being in the back of the room with the line staff and the managers, making sure that we were operationally sound, to move to the front of the room and be able to be with the leadership, with fellow directors, where I could, wheel and deal, and start making, agreements, and be able to bring what they call the bacon home to the agency, and make sure that our agency was recognized not as the 25-pound monkey among 800-pound gorillas like DSHS and Department of Corrections, but ensure that our agency was known for the work that it does. And now I work with an agency that has an incredible team that works with me, that is not just a good enough agency, but it's probably one of the best in the country. Thank you.
Alfie, that's great advice. I'm going to write it down. I'm going to choose fear, and I'm going to wear yellow, because you're rocking this outfit. Yellow is fantastic. Thank you, and thank you for all that you do for our veterans. You're amazing and inspiring. Our next guest also has a connection to Fort Lewis, much like you, Alfie. Marilyn Strickland. Marilyn, you were born in Seoul, Korea, but you moved to Tacoma in 1967 when your dad was stationed at Fort Lewis, and you grew up in South Tacoma. I only moved here to Tacoma in 1999, but something I've learned since being here is that if you talk to a person who grew up in Tacoma, the questions you have to ask is, where'd you go to school? Where'd you go to school?
Edison Elementary, Gray Junior High, Mount Tahoma High School.
All right, you were correct. That is what your record says. Marilyn, you also graduated from the University of Washington, and you hold an MBA from Clark Atlanta University. You've served on boards for Sound Transit, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and the Democratic Mayors Association. You've appeared on Meet the Press and National Public Radio. Big thumbs up for that. And you're a trustee with the Urban Land Institute. You've been recognized by the National League of Cities, Women in Municipal Government for outstanding local leadership, And you were recognized as the 2015 Washington Trade Hero by the Washington Council on International Trade. All that, and you're serving your second term as the mayor of Tacoma. Bravo. Amazing private and public sector experience. You have experiences and lessons from a range of places that you can be sharing with us. But today, you're sharing a lesson that you learned back when you were 10 years old. What was going on at that time?
10 years old on the playground at Edison Elementary School. So everyone has had the opportunity to talk a bit about the photo. So I believe this was my second grade class photo, and that was my favorite daisy dress. It had these giant daisies all over it. And my mother, who is Korean, she's 88 years old. So like your mother, she often says, today I'm gonna go visit the old people and talk to them. And I'm like, Mom, you are old. Oh yeah, I know, but. So my mother had a philosophy when she would send me to school. And it's based on her life experience. So my father was African American, born in Noonan, Georgia, in rural Georgia in 1920. He joined the service to send money home to his family. When he joined the military, it was segregated until President Truman integrated the Army. He met my mother in Seoul. We're here in Tacoma in 1967. So she's sending me to school. And if you know South Tacoma neighborhood, it's not like most of the kids show up there dressed to the nines like they're going to church when they go to school every day. But my mother always said to me, and my father, you have to be twice as good to get half as much. Your father is black. I'm an immigrant. People are going to underestimate you and assume the worst about you. So you always have to look really good and be the best student. And coming back to the philosophy of you have to be twice as good to get half as much. So let's fast forward a couple years to the playground. So we have recess at elementary school. We all go charging out there, and we play games, we run on the field. So 2 square, 4 square, 6 square. Is there anyone old enough in this room to remember those games, right? You lined up, and when someone got bounced out of a box, you went in, it was your turn. And one year, there was a girl who dominated the 6 square box, and she just decided she didn't like me. So she would call me names, she would be disparaging to me. You know, kids are kids on the playground. No one came to my rescue, no one stood up for me. So this went on for a couple of weeks, and I went home from school one day, and my parents could tell that I was sulking about something. And I told them what happened. I said, oh, this girl's really mean to me, she picks on me, you know, never any physical contact, but just very disparaging and made me feel badly. So after about the 3rd or 4th week, my father just kind of had enough of it. No, he did not go to the school and beat up a girl. He decided to enroll me in karate lessons. So down the street from Edison Elementary School on South Tacoma Way on 54th and South Tacoma Way used to be a place called Steve Armstrong Karate School. I think there's a pawn shop there today. But I was there at Steve Armstrong Karate School. They enrolled me in the karate lessons. And there were a couple things about going to that karate school that were interesting for me. Number 1, I was the only girl in the class. Number 2, I was the youngest in the class because most of the boys were middle school aged. And number 3, I was the smallest in the class physically. So to help deal with my being bullied on the playground, my dad said, you know what, you're going to take karate lessons. Now he didn't do this so that I would become physically aggressive and start trying to fight with people on the playground. He wanted me to be able to defend myself. But I think more than anything else, he wanted me to be confident because bullies can tell when you're scared. They have a sense about them, and they like to pick on people that they think they can intimidate. So I go to my first karate lesson, and when you do karate lessons, you wear what's called a gi. So it's your pants, and you're kind of like a tunic that folds over, and you wear a belt around it. So I was a white belt, because that's where you start. And I remember going to my first karate lesson with my gi in my bag. I said, okay, where do I go change my clothes? There was no girls' dressing room at Steve Armstrong karate lessons. So they had a space for me up this rickety old staircase in an attic above the karate school that was dusty and filthy. And I would go up there by myself, change my clothes, leave my clothes up there, and then do my karate lessons. The other thing I remember too about the karate school is that the floor was filthy because every time after the karate lesson was over, my feet were just covered in soot at the end. But it was part of the lesson. So what do you do at karate school? You do your warm-up calisthenics, you do push-ups, you do sit-ups, you do the warm-ups. And then you do these exercises which are called katas. And a kata is a routine of about 7 or 8 moves. And in Isshinryu karate, the kata is meant to assume that you are being attacked on all sides, from the front, from the back, to the left, to the right. So it's a series of moves that you do, and they're not necessarily aggressive moves, they're defensive moves. So you go on defense to block a punch or a kick, but then at the right time, you land a punch, or you give a really hard kick. So you do these katas, and that prepares you to spar. What's sparring? It's when you fight someone. So imagine me as a 10-year-old girl doing my katas, and now it's time for me to spar with some of my mates in my class. It was a room full of boys, mostly teenagers. They were going to take it easy on the little girl because she probably wasn't that good. So as I first started sparring with people, I could tell they were pulling back and not really doing what they would do. But as I got better and more confident, you would see the boys start to kind of get into their regular routine as well. I got to the point where I was in the class and the instructor would say, look at her, she can do 25 push-ups. Look at her, she does her kata with perfect precision. And then I would start to fight in tournaments, and I was being very successful. Now, in a small community like South Tacoma, word gets around when kids are doing things. So the doors to the karate school would be open during the summer, and kids would ride their bikes past on their way to the drugstore or the burger joint. And then I started getting a little audience. And so there were kids from my elementary school who would come on the bench and watch me taking karate lessons, watching me spar. And within a few weeks or months, I really wasn't getting picked on the playground anymore. And it wasn't necessarily because I went in there with my fist blazing saying I was going to try to fight someone. It was because I had this quiet confidence about me. If anyone came after me, I could probably defend myself. And that really changed the trajectory for me on the playground. Now, I share that story with you because you don't think about taking karate lessons as a 10-year-old translating into your adult life, especially one as the mayor of a mid-sized city in America. But let me make an analogy here. Often when we're in politics, the field on which we play is often like a playground. There are times when you are attacked. There are times when people come after you. And sometimes your best offense is stepping back, being patient, being confident, and being able to defend yourself. In fact, in karate, there are times you are silent and you don't move. And one of the things that I've learned is that sometimes in politics, silence does the heaviest lifting for you. People often expect you to be aggressive and assertive. They'll say something, do something. How can you put up with that? And what I've learned is that sometimes, like Muhammad Ali used to say, rope-a-dope. Let them wear themselves out. Let them keep fighting and keep punching. And sometimes things just kind of take care of themselves. And so the karate lessons have taught me infinite patience, what it's like to walk into a room with confidence, and what it's like being underestimated. As a woman of color, I am used to being underestimated. Every time I've run for office or thought about running for office, I was told I would lose. I've had someone try to talk me out of it. I've been told to wait my turn. And sometimes that advice was good. But whenever I decided to pursue running for office, I have always won. So I think there's an opportunity there to think about what quiet confident means, and always remembering for me, you have to be twice as good to get half as much. Now, when I think about applying this to the daily routine of what we do in politics, whether that's having conversations with my colleagues about policy issues, whether it's dealing with the public, whether it's figuring out what's the best policy to move forward, I think we often underestimate, especially in today's climate, the ability to stand back, listen, take stock, and not have a knee-jerk reaction to every slight, to every word, to every crazy post on social media, and just taking the time to get the facts and find out what's what. Sometimes things end up taking care of themselves, and you don't have to do anything except rise above the fray. And sometimes you need to get your hands dirty and get in there, but you do so from a place of power when you take the time to be patient, to look at the whole scene, and sometimes just letting some of the drama play itself out. We live in a high drama political climate with people who have a lot of opinions about a lot of different things. I tell people that the hardest thing about being an elected official is having to practice restraint. Restraint from saying the first thing that comes to your mind when someone says something or says something that's totally untrue. But also having the ability to just take a step back, letting things play out, getting information, and making decisions on your own terms to get the best outcome for the people that you serve. It's not always easy, but I will sit here and tell you today, in 2017, when I was asked to talk about my experience and to share a story, I didn't know that I would go back to Edison Elementary School on the playground in a 6-square box and talk about being bullied, taking karate lessons, being the only girl, learning how to defend myself, and how that skill set of patience and tenacity, knowing when to stand up and knowing when to stand down, has probably served me really, really well. So those are my life lessons, and thank you very much for letting me share my story with you.
Thank you, Marilyn. That is great advice. It's very pressing advice for right now. And I think too, do we have any 10-year-olds in the audience? Someone around 10, under 10. I see some people who are younger, and also pay attention to what's happening now. You're getting wisdom even now. Even now you're getting wisdom. So thank you so much, Marilyn, for taking this back and forward. So our last featured storyteller today is also a first. Tad Monroe is the first man to join the WILLO Storytelling Festival. Thank you, Tad. So, Tad, you've lived in Tacoma since 1993, and I'm gonna let you guys know that Tad and I are duty bound for the rest of our lives to always recognize the fact that we were next door neighbors for 10 years. So we have a long history together. And Tad, you have spent a lifetime soaking in stories and telling stories, and that was what brought us together. Tad and I together co-founded Drunken Telegraph, a live storytelling show that was also here in Tacoma, building community. And Tad, I was just one of many things, though. That was my little way of connecting with Tad's great big footprint here in Tacoma. You've been a community organizer for years. You're an ordained Presbyterian minister, and now you work as a field staff consultant for Habitat for Humanity International, supporting neighborhood revitalization and community development work across the country. Plus, you also run your own consulting business locally. And on top of all of that, you and your partner, Holly, are parents to 2 kids, an almost 3-year-old son named Ames, and a practically brand new daughter who I shall not name because that's what your story's all about. Naming your daughter was not an easy choice. Tad, what's in a name for you?
Thank you, Megan. Well, first of all, it's just an honor to share the stage with all of you women, and thank you for the invitation song to be a part of this. So names are really important to me, and when Holly and I sat down to name our children, we had long lists and long and deliberate conversations, because for me, a name is more than just the thing that we're going to call someone by. When you give someone a name, you're giving them a story, right? The story behind that name. And in many ways, you're setting sort of a blessing or an intention for them. And so with our son Ames 3 years ago, his name means friend. And we really like that name, and it was inspired by one of my favorite novels, Gilead by Marilyn Robinson, where one of the main character's name is John Ames. And so we came to that pretty easily. And then his middle name is David. And I have had the gift of having 4 men in my life named David who have been great friends and mentors and have brought so much love and light and wisdom into my life, and so that was a pretty easy choice. So his name is Ames David, and David in Hebrew means beloved, so his name means beloved friend. So that was Ames's story. And when it came time to naming our daughter, we came to the first name. You know, there was still a lot of consternation and thinking, but my partner Holly really loved the name Eden. And I liked it as well, and then we looked up what it means, and it means delight. And I've always loved that word, delight, because what's better in the world than delighting in someone or something, other than maybe being delighted in by someone, right? So either way, it's such a beautiful word. But then it came time to think about our middle name. And we wanted to carry on the tradition of, like we had done with Ames, of picking a family name or a name of people that had been important to us. And so we thought about it, and we tried on lots of different names. And one of the names that we thought about, or that we began to consider, was the name Marie. And Marie was my grandmother's name, my paternal grandmother's name. And Marie C. Monroe who was born Chalice Marie Pimlott. Now, she changed her name because she hated the name Chalice, like with a passion. So she changed her name to Marie C. She wouldn't tell anyone what the C actually stood for. And then when she got married, it became Monroe from Pimlott. And Marie, my grandmother, was born into rural poverty in Montana. She was the middle of 3 children. She had an older sister and a younger brother. In her words, her father was a no good, SOB, weak drunk who left the family when she was quite young, and even extenuating the circumstances of poverty in their life. And she had cue all the stories, right? We had to slip cardboard into our shoes because we had holes in our shoes. We walked through 2 feet of snow to get to school, which if you've lived in Montana might not be that much of a, exaggeration. So real poverty. But at the same time, there's all these stories about how sort of creative my grandmother was. There's this great story about how she got tired of walking to school so far, and so they didn't have enough money to have any horses, but they had this old decrepit steer, and so she actually halter broke the steer so she could ride it to school. And so that was kind of my grandmother. So she left home really early. She went to secretary school, moved to Denver, and in Denver she met a man by the name of Floyd Monroe. And Floyd was this handsome, regal, Blackfoot Indian man, also from her home state of Montana. And they fell in love, but Floyd was in the military. He was a tail gunner, and so he went off to fight in the war, but they had made this pledge that they would wait for one another. And so when the war was over, sure enough, by the grace of God, he came back, and they were married, and they moved to San Francisco for a time. And pretty soon, they really both wanted to move back to their home state. And back in those days, Floyd was due a certain amount of land if he went back to the reservation. And so they went back, and along with some other money that they had saved, they added to that land, and they started a large cattle ranching operation, right kind of in the foothills of East Glacier in Cut Bank, Montana, maybe the coldest place in the lower 48. My mom is here, and she can attest to that, having spent some time there, just south of the Canadian border, just a few miles south. And so they started that operation, and pretty soon Floyd really wanted to have children. Now, my grandmother was not all that keen on the idea. Both the whole birthing and like carrying the child, and like, what do you mean I'm not going to be able to work, or I'm going to have, like, during that time in the way that I normally work, no. And then also the whole like raising the child thing. She was like, I'm not sure, but Floyd really wanted to. So the compromise they made was adoption. And they had heard of this young boy that needed adopting just over the border in Calgary, Alberta. And so it was that they adopted this little boy that was my father, and named him Troy Angus Monroe. When Troy was still just a young boy, Marie and Floyd had gone to a dance, I believe, and they were coming back late at night on the highway when a drunk driver ran head-on to them, killing Floyd instantly and putting my grandmother in the hospital for months with a broken pelvis, amongst many other things. And after she eventually recovered, she got back to work, which is what my grandmother did. And she expanded and continued to grow the cattle operation, but then she also got more and more involved in this interest she had in breeding and showing horses and raising quarter horses and thoroughbreds for racing. And so she continued to build that business, and eventually as that desire for the horse part of the industry, unless the cattle grew, and also because she just was really tired of how cold it was in Montana, she downsized, sold the ranch, and bought a smaller ranch just outside of Yakima, Washington, and really focused on the horse side of the business. And she had a lot of success, up to just 3 years ago before she passed away and the house was sold. There was a trophy case, a huge trophy case in her house with ribbons and trophies and photos, sort of just showing the great success and the sort of legacy of her career in horse breeding and racing. A very, very successful woman in that industry. And as I said just a few years ago, she passed away, and I had the opportunity to preside at both her memorial service and her gravesite service. And so that's sort of my grandmother's backstory. And, she was, there were lots of really great things about her and her story, lots of things to respect. But she was also a complicated woman. And we were close. We spent a lot of time together when I was growing up. And I think we were close, at least as close as someone like my grandmother and someone like me could be. But one example is my grandmother got up at 4:30 in the morning every freaking day of her life. And she would let me sleep in until 5:30 in the morning. At which point, when I got up, she would make a crack about, was I going to sleep all day? And then we would go out and do 4 hours of chores on the ranch or at the racetrack, depending on where we were. It's a little embarrassing to admit, but when I was a young boy, there was a season when I had a constipation problem. You can imagine how much I like to talk about that, here or anywhere, especially then at that time, or with my grandmother, but she caught wind of that, and all of a sudden my bowel movements became way too much a part of our conversational life, and took up way too much of my grandmother's attention. And she would make me at every meal drink a huge glass of prune juice. Prune juice is the most god-awful substance, right, on earth, as far as I'm concerned. And long after I said, hey, I'm not having that problem anymore. Oh, no. Yeah, you're not, because it's the prune juice. So long after I wasn't having the issue, there was no telling her, right, that I didn't need to keep drinking the prune juice. My grandmother was a very slight and slender woman. She worked hard days, work every day of her life. She didn't eat much. And being overweight in her mind was a character flaw. It meant you were lazy and undisciplined, basically. And I've always been a pretty husky boy. I always struggled with my weight. Husky, don't you like that word? That's what we said. Oh, you're not fat, honey. You're just husky. That's what they would say. Not my grandmother, but that's what my mom would say. And so, she was always talking to me about my weight, what I was eating, and to say it gave me a complex is an understatement. It was a really hard and frustrating thing that seemed like she could never let go of. When I would stay at her house on the weekends, she would take me back home to school on Monday morning, only she wouldn't take me all the way to school because she felt like what would be good for me, both exercise-wise and discipline, is to drop me off exactly 1 mile from the school, right? And we drove it one time so she could figure out exactly 1 mile. And what was even worse is it was right at a donut shop, and she would never buy me a donut before I went. And she would make me walk to school, even though it would take 5 more minutes to drive me there. But it was all about principle. My grandmother we were so different. It confused her why I wanted to go into ministry and nonprofit work. I think it always sort of hurt her a bit that I didn't want to inherit the ranch and kind of go into the family business. So that's my grandmother, and as I was thinking about that name, Marie, I'm thinking, do I really want to name my daughter? Like, this is a complicated relationship. But as I said, she was a complicated woman. But here's who Marie also was. She taught me about just about everything. I mean, this woman knew how to do the really important and basic things in life. She taught me about a lot of things. She helped cultivate my love for animals and care and nurture and what it meant to really, she really loved the animals that she worked with. She taught me about hard work. She gave me a lot of responsibility at a young age on the ranch and taught me important lessons through that. She came to almost all my football games. My grandmother really loved football. Came to my games. Every article, poem, short story that I wrote growing up, she kept in a scrapbook. I saw tears in her eyes at my high school graduation and my college graduation, and she whispered into my ear, not too loudly, that she was proud of me. She gave to the causes that were important to me, even though she could really care less about most of them, but she gave because they were important to me. And she bought me a truck so I could work my way through college while I was away and helped pay for college. I wouldn't have been able to get through, wouldn't have been able to have gone to the schools that I went to without her financial support. So again, Marie was a complicated woman. But here's the thing. I'm a pretty complicated person myself. And one of the things that I believe and that I see in our society is that we're much more comfortable letting men be complicated than women. We're much more comfortable with laughing off the rough edges or the nuances. But if a woman is too assertive, she's maybe called bossy or controlling, right? Or, you know, there's just, I've seen it too many times in my own work, and so that really pains me and frustrates me. And when I think about having a daughter, I don't want her to face that double standard. And so my grandmother would have never called herself a feminist. She never marched, or like Miriam's mom, she never protested a darn thing other than that the mailman was late with the mail, or, you know, whatever. Someone charged her too much for something. But she, you know, she never read I don't think she knew who Gloria Steinem was. Like, this was not her world. But here's the thing. She was the strongest person I ever knew. Man or woman, I don't know anybody in my entire life who lived their life more on their own terms than my grandmother. And she had so much success and endured so many things when so many things were against her. I mean, all of the car accident, losing her husband, you know, there were like 2 other really serious instances with horses, lacerated livers, broken bones, where she bounced back and came back. She was successful in 2 industries that were dominated by men. There were no women doing what my grandmother was doing at the time that she was doing it. She was a trailblazer, and when you talk to the male colleagues who, you know, all, especially at her passing, you know, I began to hear these stories and they would stream in. You know, they would always tell a story about a lashing that they had taken from Marie, right? And about how hard a bargain she drove and how shrewd she was. But in the same instant, these men became her friends, and they would talk about what deep respect they had. They would talk about friendship. They would talk about her brilliance. They would talk about her generosity. So it was that, again, I was left with this decision. What middle name to give this new daughter of mine. And I remember this story that she and others would recount. Whenever anyone would say, "Hey, Marie, did you ever think about getting remarried after Floyd died?" And apparently, there was a suitor not too long after, very wealthy man who took a liking and a shining to my grandmother. And they were sort of courting for a time, and one day he said to her, "Marie, I want you to marry me. I want to take care of you and give you everything that you need and desire and not have to work anymore and just be able to be happy." And the story goes, my grandmother thought about it, not for very long, and said, "Hell no." And she said, "Hell no," because as the story goes, she said, "I don't want anybody to take care of me. I don't want to answer to anybody else. I want to do what I want to do. I want to go when I want to go." And everything that man talked about just sounded so boring, like there was no adventure. And so it is we decided to name our daughter Eden Marie Noel Monroe. And you might, with that name came Marie's story, right? Which I look forward to telling her. And with it comes a legacy, I hope, and the intention that she would be able to live life on her own terms. And that we would work for a world that allows her to really live life on her own terms. That she would be allowed to be a complicated woman. That she would be both brash when she needs to be brash, and assertive, and strong and opinionated. And that she would also be generous and compassionate and have a fabulous sense of humor, just like my grandmother. So you might find it humorous or interesting to know that Eden's in here somewhere. She's quiet right now, so she must be sleeping. That Eden seems to have taken to the name. Even at 3 months old, she has a great deal of opinion and intensity about her. We weren't expecting that. Our son was a little easier in that department. She is a force to be reckoned with. She is so stubborn, and she has two very stubborn parents, and she bests us almost every time and drives me crazy. I mean, literally crazy. And at the same time, she has the most infectious smile and gaze and laugh and infectious joy. And so, there's that old adage, be careful what you wish for. But no one said it would be easy raising a daughter who would live life on her own terms. And nobody said it would be easy working for a world where every daughter can do that. But one thing's for sure, I believe I'll become a better man trying. Thank you.
Thank you, Dad. That was a great story. Thanks so much. So, you guys have been through so many lives in such a short time, and I want to give you a little heads up about the way that stories work in the brain. So stories work two ways. First off, as you listen to people take you inside their lives, great stories like these click on the movie camera in your head. And perhaps you've actually formed your own memories. You've seen that horse farm. You've seen that karate school. You've been to Birmingham, Alabama. You've been to these places. And the beauty is that with stories, your brain is going to lodge those as though they were your own memories. Those stories are going to be within you. But there's a second way that stories work, and it's going to start happening here in just a few minutes and as you go home today. When you listen to other people's stories, it begins to bring up your own memories of things that have happened, your own lessons. and they're asking to be told. The very best stories trigger you to tell your own story. So as you process these lessons and these experiences from other people, I also want to invite you to listen carefully to the story inside of you that's asking to be let out, because you have wisdom to share as well. Thank you.